Hi everybody, my name is Mark Batty. I'm the Edexcel History Subject Advisor. Welcome back to part 4 of this Edexcel GCSE History Summer 22 feedback session. In the last part of this video, we looked at senior examiner feedback for AO3 source questions. In this video, part 4, we'll be looking at senior examiner feedback on questions targeting AO4 interpretations. We'll also be looking forward to the 2023 series and upcoming training and support that's going to be available. Okay, so firstly, questions targeting AO4. Now, just as a reminder, there'll be extracts from student responses, and on each slide, it will tell you where those responses came from. They'll either be from the Principal Examiners Report or from the Delegate Booklet, which is available in the link below. Okay, so the questions we're going to be looking at today are the interpretations questions, which focus on AO4. These are questions 3B, 3C, and 3D from paper 3. And just a reminder that this is a package of questions which gets students to look at two sources offering opposing views and then two related interpretations. And as students work through this package of questions, it gets them familiar with the sources and the interpretations before it finishes with question 3D, which is the big, how far do you agree with the interpretations question? And the first question we're going to look at is how interpretations differ. Now, this is question 3B, and it's focusing on two interpretations that students have provided, and they need to say what the difference between them is. So that's the key difference in emphasis. Now, the interpretations will always provide alternative views, although they're not necessarily contradictory ones. Now, when identifying the difference, students need to support their answer with details from each interpretation. It's really important that they make sure they're writing about the interpretations, though, and not the two sources that are also provided. They also need to make sure that they identify difference in relation to the specific inquiry in the question. For example, on this summer's Germany paper, the inquiry was about how Hitler became Chancellor. So answers which identified a difference in the amount of support he had, they completely missed the focus of the question and the thrust of the interpretations. Now, students do tend to perform well on this question. The mean mark for Germany this summer was almost 3 out of 4 marks. The next question we're going to look at is why the interpretations differ. Now, if you look at the mark scheme for this question, there are 3 different ways that are exemplified in the mark scheme, and students only need to use one of these. So one way they can do this is to recognize that historians might use different sources in their research. Another way is to understand that historians may choose to emphasize different aspects of a topic. And the third way is to understand that historians may have a different perspective. For example, one choosing to focus on political and one choosing to focus on economics, or it could be a different timescale. The key point is an understanding of the role of the historian in constructing their interpretation. So students should not simply state that source B matches interpretation 1, but instead they should explain that a part of the view interpretation 1 may be the result of the historian consulting source B or similar sources. Comments should be supported by references to each interpretation and sources, obviously, if they choose to answer it that way, showing how the suggested factor has affected the thrust of the interpretations. Answers based on the provenance of the interpretations, for example, the date the interpretation was published, the nationality of the author, or the fact that it was a book or website, are unlikely to be able to do this. Now on the screen, you can see an exemplar answer from the USA paper for this summer. As you can see, the students suggested that a difference in focus is the reason for the different interpretations, but unfortunately they did not adequately support that comment with evidence. Therefore, the mark stays in level 1. So what the student needed to do in this case to achieve level 2 was to add details from the interpretations to support the comments made. So the culmination of this package of questions is question 3D. And this is the question that asks students, how far do you agree with interpretation 2? So having worked with the sources and interpretations for part A and C, students are then asked how far they agree with interpretation 2. And in doing so, they're directed to make use of both interpretations as well as their knowledge of the historical context in their answers. Students should remember that this question is about whether they think the historian who produced interpretation 2 got it right. They're not expected to evaluate the interpretations for reliability or utility, and they're not being asked to offer their own views on the question in the inquiry. The emphasis should be on analysing the views in the interpretations. There should be references to each interpretation, and contextual knowledge should be integrated into their evaluation of the interpretations rather than being offered as information. So these are some common limitations that result in lower level answers to question 3D. Answers which offer the candidate's own view in response to the inquiry. Answers which focus on one interpretation rather than analysing both of them. Answers which simply identify valid points in each interpretation in turn. Answers which treat the interpretations as sources to be evaluated for their reliability or utility. And answers which do not include contextual knowledge or which do not link contextual knowledge to an evaluation of the interpretations. So one thing students need to watch out for is if they simply provide an explanation of the different views and there's little sense of evaluation. For example, a student who agrees with interpretation 2, then agrees with interpretation 1, and then their conclusion doesn't really come down on one side. They sort of partially agree with interpretation 2. So it's really important that students plan their response to this and establish clear and valid criteria for how they're going to judge which interpretation is more convincing. And some qualities of high-level answers to question 3D. They focus on analysing and assessing the interpretations. They cover both interpretations. They integrate contextual knowledge into the evaluation. They develop a line of reasoning that runs within the answer. The judgment is consistent with the comments in the answer, and the judgment is justified. And the very best answers also show how the authors of the interpretation have created different views. This could be through the use of language, tone, emphasis, selection of details. And this is just an example on screen here. So for example, in this case, interpretation 2 gives a positive view of Stalin, stating that he was a clever politician. The author of interpretation 2 emphasizes how smart Stalin was, using words like extremely. However, interpretation 1 gives views on Trotsky's weakness. Failure to do this would not stop a student achieving the top level. This is just something that they need to do to get the very top marks in this question. So we're now going to look at some extracts of a student response for question 3D, and it's from paper 3 on Mao's China. Now, the inquiry was about the causes of the Great Famine. Interpretation 1 suggested that Mao's policies led to the Great Famine, whilst interpretation 2 gives details of natural disasters such as flood, drought, and insects which destroyed crops. And what we've done here is we've just selected some extracts from a student response, just to show you the qualities of what makes a high-level response. So firstly, the introductory paragraph there, it starts with a really clear judgment. Interpretation 2 states that the cause of the Great Famine was purely the natural disasters and does not consider any other reasons. Therefore, I disagree with interpretation 2. The answer then goes on to analyse the claims in the interpretations and uses contextual knowledge to evaluate them. The student says that although interpretation contains information about events that did occur, natural hazards could not have been the leading cause for the famine, as the bad weather only affected 12% of China's land. Now that's a really good example of a student using their contextual knowledge to evaluate the interpretation. Therefore, interpretation 2 has not fully considered all causes. The student then goes on to use more contextual knowledge to support their evaluation. To make the interpretation more accurate, more weight should be given to Mao and his impact on the Great Famine. Another reason why Mao was to blame was the Four Pests campaign, and then the student goes on to describe that. So there's a clear line of reason which builds up into a coherent evaluation. And this is shown by the use of phrases such as despite this. So despite this, the main cause of the Great Famine was the false reports. These were submitted due to the fear of Mao, which rooted from his use of terror. He made himself unapproachable, and this resulted in false reports to avoid being purged. And this point is highlighted in interpretation 1, and therefore I agree with this interpretation to a larger extent than interpretation 2. So as you can see there's a really clear judgment provided overall, and it's very well explained. And for that reason, this is a level 4 response. Now, obviously, we've only included some extracts from that response. The full exemplar, as well as the interpretations and sources, can be found in the delegate booklet. Okay, so that concludes our look at interpretations questions. Now we've just got a summary of some points that students should bear in mind for the whole of the assessment. They need to be familiar with the terms in the specification and significant dates. They need to recognize the focus of the question, the topic, its timescale, the second order concept, and any specific inquiry. They need to understand the different approaches needed in answers to different styles of questions, for example, the narrative account question. They need to understand the mark scheme. For example, the need to cover 3 aspects of content in a 12 or 16 mark answer, which includes stimulus, or that a source utility answer making only 1 point each about content, provenance, and contextual knowledge will score more highly than an answer making 5 points about content, but not including any contextual knowledge. They need to plan effectively in the exam. Think the answer through, don't just dive in, so that there is a consistent line of reasoning created. They need to approach the historic environment question 2 and modern depth study question 3 as packages. They need to plan their time effectively so that all questions are answered at an appropriate length. Ensure that answers are clearly explained and write in the correct part of the answer booklet. If they have to write more, they should use extra paper rather than write elsewhere in the booklet. Okay, we're now going to look forward to summer 2023 and also look at some of the upcoming training and support we're going to be making available soon. So on the 10th of May, the Department for Education announced plans for summer 2023 exams. And the key point to note here is that it's essentially a return to normal for GCSE history. So the DFE confirmed that there'll be a return to full subject content coverage for GCSE. That means that all 4 topics must be taught and assessed in summer 2023. So we need to redo our entry codes so that they're reverting to the pre-pandemic codes. We have made the entry codes available in the information manual, which is on the website, and we will be updating the entry code calculator as well very soon. We need to put the 2 halves of paper 2 back together, so there'll be the 2 topics, the British depth and the period study, assessed on the same day in 2 separate booklets. And the time will go back to 1 hour 45 minutes. We've also ensured that paper 1 will be sat before the May half term. This is to ensure there's more space in between the exams in case of COVID disruption, but hopefully it'll help students as well with their preparation for the exams. In terms of 2023 award and outcomes, Ofqual have stated that they aim to return to results that are in line with those in pre-pandemic years. And for anyone who's teaching A-level history, there'll be no advanced information available for students in summer 23 as there was in summer 22. So the preference is to return to a normal exam series next summer. In terms of support and training, we're going to be working on some new exemplar scripts from summer 22, and those will be made available on the website this term. If you've been using our Knowledge Booster test for topics like American West and Elizabeth, you'll be pleased to hear that we're working on some new Knowledge Boosters for Weimar and Nazi Germany and hopefully medicine, and they'll be available in early 2023. We're also working on more Key Stage 3 History Topic of the Month items, such as Raphael Lemkin and Mary Seacole. And we've also got a new case study coming out soon on Literature of Winchester for migration teachers. Some new training we've got coming soon. We're going to be doing a network event on the paper 2 period study. That should be available this autumn, and that's to help teachers who haven't been teaching the period study over recent years. We're going to do an update on teaching migrants in Britain thematic study. We're going to be doing some training on supporting low retaining students, which will be updated with new exemplars from this summer. And we'll also be doing some training on supporting higher retaining students containing exemplars from this summer. And we've also run A-level Summer 22 feedback events, and in November there'll be a coursework event. Okay, I hope you found this session useful. On the screen you can see my contact details. Please feel free to get in touch if you've got any questions.